If you think you understand what is happening right now in Washington when it comes to immigration policy and the fight over funding for immigration and customs enforcement, you might want to think again. Because in a stunning reversal that very few people saw coming, Democrats have completely flipped the script on their Republican colleagues, and the consequences of this political maneuver could reshape how America handles immigration enforcement for years to come. What we are witnessing right now is not just another routine budget battle. This is a fundamental shift in strategy that has caught many longtime political observers completely off guard. For decades, the conversation around immigration enforcement followed a predictable pattern. Republicans pushed for more funding, stricter enforcement, and expanded powers for agencies like ICE. Democrats, on the other hand, often found themselves on defense, arguing for more humanitarian approaches and sometimes calling for reduced funding or even the abolition of certain enforcement mechanisms. But something remarkable has happened in recent months, and if you are not paying close attention, you might miss the significance of what is unfolding right before our eyes. Democrats have recognized that the political landscape has shifted dramatically. Public opinion polls consistently show that Americans across the political spectrum are concerned about border security and immigration enforcement. Rather than continuing to fight against the tide of public sentiment, key Democratic strategists have decided to take a completely different approach. They are no longer simply opposing Republican proposals. Instead, they are actively engaging in the funding debate in ways that put them in the driver's seat. Here is what makes this so fascinating and potentially game-changing. Instead of blanket opposition to ICE funding, Democrats are now proposing their own detailed funding packages that include substantial resources for enforcement while simultaneously attaching conditions that align with their policy priorities. This approach puts Republicans in an uncomfortable position because rejecting these proposals means voting against funding for the very agency they claim to support. The specific details of what Democrats are proposing deserve your attention because they reveal a sophisticated understanding of both policy and politics. The funding packages being put forward include billions of dollars for ICE operations, but they also include requirements for how those funds must be spent. There are provisions requiring that enforcement priorities focus on individuals who pose genuine threats to public safety rather than long-established community members with no criminal records. There are mandates for improved conditions at detention facilities. There are requirements for transparency and reporting that would give Congress and the public much greater insight into how ICE conducts its operations. For seniors watching this, you might be wondering why any of this matters to you specifically. The answer is more significant than you might initially realize. Immigration enforcement policies affect communities across America, including the caregivers, healthcare workers, and essential service providers that many seniors depend on daily. Changes in how ICE operates could have ripple effects that touch your daily life in ways you might not immediately recognize. But beyond the direct policy implications, there is something larger happening here that every American should understand. We are watching a masterclass in political strategy that could fundamentally alter how both parties approach contentious issues going forward. The traditional playbook said that Democrats should avoid the immigration enforcement debate entirely or simply vote no on Republican proposals. But that approach had significant weaknesses. It allowed Republicans to portray Democrats as soft on border security and unwilling to enforce existing laws. It gave Republicans the ability to shape the entire narrative around immigration without meaningful pushback. The new approach turns all of that on its head. By actively proposing robust funding packages with specific conditions attached, Democrats have forced their opponents to either accept provisions they would normally oppose or vote against funding for an agency they publicly champion. It is a political checkmate that has left many Republican strategists scrambling to respond. Let us talk about the specific numbers being discussed because they help illustrate just how dramatically the conversation has shifted. The Democratic proposals include funding levels that in some cases exceed what Republicans initially proposed. We are talking about billions of dollars for enforcement operations, detention facilities, and personnel. These are not token gestures designed to provide political cover. These are serious funding proposals that would substantially resource ICE operations. But here is where the strategy becomes truly brilliant. By proposing such robust funding, Democrats have taken away the Republican talking point that they want to defund or abolish ICE. How can you accuse someone of wanting to eliminate an agency when they are proposing to fund it at historic levels? The answer is that you cannot, at least not credibly, and this has created significant problems for Republican messaging that relied heavily on portraying Democrats as anti-enforcement. The conditions attached to the funding are where the policy substance really lives. Democrats are requiring that ICE prioritize enforcement against individuals with serious criminal convictions rather than conducting sweeping operations that affect entire communities indiscriminately. They are mandating specific standards for detention facilities that would address many of the humanitarian concerns that have plagued the immigration enforcement system for years. They are including provisions for legal representation and due process protections that would ensure individuals have a meaningful opportunity to present their cases before immigration judges. Now, some Republicans have accused Democrats of trying to gut enforcement through these conditions. They argue that the restrictions would prevent ICE from doing its job effectively. But this argument has proven difficult to sustain when you look at the actual language of the proposals. The conditions still allow for robust enforcement. They simply require that enforcement be conducted in a manner that prioritizes public safety and respects constitutional protections. For seniors who remember the immigration debates of previous decades, what is happening now represents a remarkable evolution. The conversation is no longer about whether to enforce immigration laws. Both parties are now proposing to fund enforcement at substantial levels. The debate has shifted to how enforcement should be conducted, what priorities should guide enforcement decisions, and what safeguards should be in place to prevent abuses. This shift matters for several reasons that go beyond the immediate policy implications. It suggests that the era of simply saying no to opposing party proposals may be ending. Voters have grown frustrated with the endless gridlock in Washington, where both parties simply reject whatever the other side proposes without offering meaningful alternatives. By engaging constructively while still advancing their own priorities, Democrats are modeling a different approach to governing that could resonate with independent voters who are tired of partisan warfare. The response from Republican leadership has been revealing. Some have attempted to dismiss the Democratic proposals as political theater designed to create difficult votes rather than actually solve problems. Others have grudgingly acknowledged that the approach puts them in a challenging position. A few have even indicated willingness to negotiate, recognizing that achieving some of their enforcement priorities with conditions attached might be preferable to the continued stalemate that has prevented any meaningful progress on immigration policy. What happens next in this funding fight could set the template for how immigration is handled for years to come. If Democrats succeed in passing their proposals or forcing Republicans into accepting compromise positions, it will validate this approach and likely see it replicated on other contentious issues. If Republicans manage to reject the Democratic proposals while still funding ICE through other mechanisms, it might suggest that the strategy has limits. For American citizens watching this unfold, particularly seniors who have witnessed decades of immigration debates, there are important lessons here about how our political system works and how it can potentially be made to work better. The cynics will say that this is all just political maneuvering designed to create campaign commercials and gain partisan advantage, and there may be some truth to that characterization. Politics is, after all, about winning elections, as much as it is about making good policy. But even if political motivations are driving this shift, the substantive outcomes could be meaningful. If the result is a more rational approach to immigration enforcement that prioritizes genuine public safety threats while protecting established community members who contribute to American society, that would be a positive development regardless of who gets the political credit. The implications for government benefits and social services that seniors rely on are also worth considering. Immigration policy intersects with Medicare, Social Security, and other programs in complex ways. The workforce that supports these programs includes immigrants at every level, from healthcare workers to administrative personnel. How America handles immigration enforcement affects the availability and quality of services that seniors depend on for their health and well-being. There is also the broader economic impact to consider. Immigration enforcement that targets working-age adults can have ripple effects throughout local economies. Businesses that lose workers may reduce services or close entirely. Tax revenue that supports local services may decline. Housing markets can be affected. All of these impacts ultimately touch seniors who live in affected communities and rely on local services and economic stability. The funding fight happening right now in Congress is not just an abstract policy debate happening far away in Washington. It has real consequences for real people across the country. Understanding what is happening and why it matters is essential for engaged citizenship, particularly for seniors who have the wisdom of experience to put current events in proper context. What makes this moment particularly significant is that we may be witnessing the beginning of a larger realignment in how immigration is discussed in American politics. For years, the debate has been characterized by extreme positions on both sides. One faction demanded open borders and the abolition of enforcement agencies. Another demanded mass deportation and militarized borders. Most Americans fell somewhere in between, wanting secure borders and orderly immigration processes while also valuing the contributions of immigrants to American society. The Democratic strategy emerging in the ICE funding fight suggests a recognition that meeting voters where they are might be more effective than trying to pull them toward ideological extremes. By accepting the premise that enforcement is necessary while fighting over how that enforcement should be conducted, Democrats are engaging with the concerns of moderate voters rather than dismissing those concerns as illegitimate. Whether this approach succeeds or fails will have implications far beyond immigration policy. It could influence how both parties approach healthcare debates, economic policy, environmental regulation, and countless other issues where Americans want pragmatic solutions rather than ideological purity. The willingness to engage substantively with opposing viewpoints rather than simply rejecting them could mark a new chapter in American politics. For now, the ICE funding fight continues to unfold in Congress. Committee hearings are being held, amendments are being proposed, negotiations are happening behind closed doors. The ultimate outcome remains uncertain, as it always does with major legislation that touches on such sensitive issues, but the strategic shift we are witnessing deserves attention because it represents something genuinely new in how immigration politics are being conducted. Seniors watching this debate should pay particular attention to how their own representatives are responding to these developments. Are they engaging constructively with proposals from the other side, or are they simply falling back on partisan talking points? Are they working toward practical solutions that address real problems, or are they more interested in scoring political points? These questions matter because they reveal something about the character and effectiveness of the people who represent you in Washington. The immigration system in America is undeniably broken in many ways. That much everyone agrees on, even if they disagree about what specifically is wrong and how to fix it. The funding fight over ICE represents one piece of the much larger puzzle of immigration reform. How this particular battle is resolved will influence whether progress on broader reform becomes possible or whether continued gridlock remains the order of the day. As this story continues to develop, staying informed about what is actually happening rather than relying on partisan characterizations from either side will be essential. The rhetoric around immigration can be inflammatory and misleading, regardless of which political direction it comes from. Taking the time to understand the actual proposals being made and the practical implications of those proposals is the responsibility of engaged citizens who want to make informed decisions about who to support and what policies to advocate for. The tables have indeed been turned in the immigration debate, at least for the moment. Where this leads and what it means for the future of American immigration policy remains to be seen. But one thing is certain. Anyone who claims to know exactly how this will all turn out is either guessing or trying to sell you something. The reality is that we are in uncharted political territory, and the outcomes will be determined by the complex interplay of policy substance, political strategy, and public sentiment that shapes all major legislation in our democratic system. Keep watching, keep asking questions, and keep demanding that your representatives work towards solutions that serve the interests of all Americans rather than simply advancing partisan agendas. That is how democracy is supposed to work, and that is how it can work if citizens remain engaged and informed about the issues that affect their lives and their communities.